Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today for part 4 of our wiring diagram series. Today, guys, we're going to focus on taking what's on paper, what we've colored, what is the lines in the diagram itself, and actually applying it to diagnosing and fixing a vehicle. In the last, 3 different videos that we've dealt with, we've been kind of showing you guys how to read the diagram, how to figure out what the symbols, that kind of thing were, how to trace the power flow through the diagram, that kind of thing. Today we're going to actually apply that to a diagnosis because I didn't want you guys to get bored tracing diagrams all day long. We will get back to doing some of those harder diagrams, but I wanted to take a break from that and show you guys an actual vehicle that I diagnosed recently. So I was dealing with a 2006 F250. This was a 6-liter diesel. Not that it really matters for this because we're dealing with an electrical concern. The customer's complaint was that intermittently he would lose a whole bunch of functionality within the vehicle. The power windows would stop working, the instrument cluster stopped working, the radio stopped working, his 4-wheel drive stopped working, his dome light stopped working, and the list goes on and on. He lost so many different functions, he had a whole list written out. What is going on? Why would he lose all those at once? Is it likely the radio fails at the same time the driver's power window switch fails at the same time the cluster fails? Probably not, right? And then for them to happen intermittently, when one comes back, they all come back. When one goes out, they all go out. There's likely something tying this all together. And the customer told me that it's been doing this for quite a while, a couple months now, but it's progressively getting worse, okay? It used to happen once every time he drove it, or once every couple times he drove it. Now it's happening almost all the time when he's driving. It's almost always out. Whatever the radio, the switch, it's almost always not working. What we're dealing with here, guys, is a problem that is likely from one source that's tying in all of these different systems. So I'm going to show you guys what I do. What I do is, before I had the ability to do it digitally on my laptop, I would take diagrams from each of those systems, from interior lighting, power windows, radio, and cluster. I'm just going to take those 4. But I would take them from each of the systems that he's complaining about, lay them out on my bench, and I would try to find the commonality in all of them. There's likely going to be 1, maybe 2 components in each of them that's the same across all of them, right? Because when one goes out, they all go out. It's unlikely that they're all going bad at the same time, okay? That's what I've done here digitally. I'm using a program here called Microsoft Whiteboard. I've simply copied and pasted the diagrams into this program, which gives me the ability to draw all over them like I'm a football announcer and drawing lines and dashes and all that fun stuff. But it also lets me save it. It lets me scale it properly. I can get it zoomed in as looking at the diagram like that. I can zoom out and see everything. I can take notes. It's really just amazing. The different programs that we can use today. Microsoft Whiteboard, Google Jam, Dropbox Paper. There's a million of them out there, guys. Just Google a digital whiteboard program and you'll likely find something that's free. I don't know if Microsoft Whiteboard is. It's something that we have included with our subscription to Microsoft 365. But anyways, use whatever program you want. I've laid all the diagrams into this program here. Let's dig into interior lighting. We'll start there because it's on the left side. So, starting with our first diagram in interior lighting, I'm not going to go ahead and bother drawing powers and grounds into everything at this point, because really what I'm doing is I'm just looking for my commonality within this system. So I'm not seeing in this diagram itself the lights themselves, but we can see that we're traveling to E, C, and C here, as well as A, B, and F. So we do have a continuation, 89-2-4-3-2, and so on. So I did grab that continuation just for some of the interior lighting. So we're coming from E, we're coming from C, and there's our interior lighting, which appears to just be hard grounded at G201 and 100, okay? All right, so E and C, we'll trace that kind of just back up here. So C is right here, E is right here, which leads us up to our battery saver relay, which is inside of our instrument cluster. Interesting. That battery saver relay is powered up by a fuse that's hot at all times, fuse 2.41, 10 amps. So if our interior lighting is not working, It could be because we have a lot of really bad bulbs, or something to do with the instrument cluster, battery saver relay, central junction box. Basically, at this point, guys, I'm just going to take notes in this that I want to label out the things that could be causing my problems. So we have the IPC, instrument panel cluster. We have the BSR, battery saver relay. We have the CJB, central junction box. We had fuse 2.41. 2 simply means that it's fuse box 2 on here, which is the central junction box. So I'm just going to put fuse 41. We're also dealing with fuse 2 and what is that? Fuse 35. Okay, so all I've done is take notes. I'm just labeling out the major components that could cause my lighting, interior lighting, to fail. One of these fuses could be bad. The central junction box, the IPC, instrument panel cluster, the battery saver relay, or of course, I mean, we could have wiring issues here, you know, really anywhere. Those are some problems. Oh, and then I suppose I should label out my ground. G201, if just the interior lighting is down, so I'm going to throw that up there as well. Ground 201. Okay. All right, does that make sense, guys, of how I'm picking out the major components that could cause my failure for the interior lighting circuit? Now I'm going to do the same thing for the power window circuit. Okay, everybody following me so far? Understand why I'm not really drawing in powers and grounds at this point. I'm just looking for points of failure that could lead to the other diagrams. All right, starting at the top, fuse 2.2, fuse 2.41. Sounds pretty familiar to me right there. Fuse. So again, we're dealing with fuse 2, fuse 41. Ooh, instrument panel clusters in here too. Battery saver relay. Dealing with this little guy here, which 41 is, it's labeled 41. We don't really know what that is yet. Actually, I lied. If we look back at this diagram, 41 is actually a microprocessor. So right here. So this is some sort of dotted line box. It's simply some sort of small processor inside there, some sort of small computer inside of there. We're going to go down through our CJB, central junction box, and we're going to go into the accessory delay relay, fuse 2.42 and 601. Let's follow these guys down and see what's actually affecting, because we have K, A, and H. So we'll go ahead and grab the next diagram in the series, which actually takes us to the master window switch coming from A. So this leg right here. So let's go ahead. I'm going to just take these guys off because we're not using them right now. A comes into our master window switch, which, by the way, guys, this looks like a mess for those of you that haven't seen diagrams before. We will at some point get to looking at switch diagrams, power window switch diagrams, just not today. That's a class in and of itself, I believe. Get all that off there. So we're coming down through A. A bunch of stuff happens inside of here, and we eventually power and ground our power window motor here on the driver's front side. So following back up A, we could have an issue with fuse 601, accessory delay, which apparently is here turned on by our battery saver relay. All right, so we're dealing with the central junction box. We're dealing with those two fuses. We're dealing with, what was that, fuse 601. And we're dealing with the accessory delay relay. We'll call that ADR. Oh, and we're dealing, I guess, with the instrument panel cluster, IPC. And we are dealing with the battery saver relay. Oops. Bring that back in. BSR. All right, already I'm starting to see some similarities. Interesting enough, interior lighting and power window both have the instrument cluster involved in those diagrams. Now let's get on to the radio, much smaller diagram. Fuse 32, fuse 11, and fuse 42. Oh, look at it. Coming from the accessory delay relay. Okay, so we are dealing with, oh, let's go back here, G200, G201. So let's call it our fuses. Now I scribbled over it and can't read it. Fuse 32, fuse 11, F32, F11, And what was this one? Fuse 42. All right. And then, oh yeah, we're dealing with the ADR, accessory delay relay. And we're dealing with G201 and G200. 201, G200. Alrighty. So far, ADR, G201, G201, F11. Oh, F11's not in any of their ones, but F42. So interestingly, none of these fuses are in any of the other diagrams. That's interesting. But the accessory delay relay is. So now let's take a look at our cluster. So we got, starting at the top, fuse 33, 45, and fuse 2.2, powering up our cluster itself. Now, unfortunately for us, the cluster actually has 6 wiring diagrams related, so we're just going to skim through these very quickly. We got a bunch of the gauges here. That's what this is being called out over here. Each of these numbers over here, 4, 5, 15, 17, and so on, are the individual gauges that are inside of this cluster, okay? But we don't know exactly what's happening inside of this box right here because it's not showing us a direct circuit inside of there, unfortunately. All right, let's scroll down. Parking brake, brake fluid level. Oh, 4x4 stuff right here, guys. 4-wheel drive's involved with the cluster. Let's keep scrolling down. Obviously, we're going to have fuel level sender stuff going into the cluster for the fuel gauge. We got some airbag stuff here, restraint control module, oil pressure, some generator stuff, charging system stuff going into the cluster. Makes sense, right? We got charging lights and gauges and airbag lights and so on and so forth. So again, we're dealing with these different pieces in this diagram. Scroll down some more. We're dealing with a message center, air filter sensor, compass sensor, fuse 2.45, and the CJB is kind of snuck in here. That's powering this compass sensor module. Interesting, they stuck that down in the middle of the diagram there. And look at that, guys. This is really looking familiar. We've seen this diagram before, right? Central junction box at the top, instrument cluster. Here, we've seen this before. Over here. Right? Central junction box at the top, instrument cluster, very, very similar, except this guy over here is a little bit different. So the BSR is powering down to that over there. What is our BSR powering over here? Okay. We may have found the ticket here, guys. BSR apparently is powering the accessory delay relay. All right. BSR, ADR, fuse 35, 2, and 41. Zoom back out here. F35, oops. F35, F2, F41. We have the BSR. We have the ADR. And that's basically the same diagram that we were seeing here in interior lighting, and actually very similar to our diagram here, if you remember, in power windows. Get all that scribble out of the way. And here, guys, we're seeing again the BSR and the ADR inside of our power window diagram as well. Guys, I think our problem is going to fall within the cluster itself. Let's go ahead and trace out this diagram and take a look at how this circuit functions. All right, we'll start with our power at all times. We'll draw that in red. We have hot at all times. Oh, that's not a highlighter. We have hot at all times coming in through fuse 41, 10 amp, going into our BSR, battery saver relay. Hot at all times here, going into what we're assuming is some sort of computer. What we're being told is some sort of computer. And then we have hot at all times coming into the interior lamps relay. Let's go ahead and grab green. We're looking for ground at all times. Looks like, actually, this one does call out ground at all times within that microprocessor. So, interesting enough here, guys, the computer itself is showing it's grounded at all times, but that doesn't mean that it's grounding through the actual body of the computer, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that. This could be just grounding through a wire that's attached to the computer that goes to ground at all times, okay? We don't know for sure, by the way this looks, that we're just grounding to the case of the computer, if that makes sense, okay? Just so you guys know. All right, switched power we've been drawing in as blue, so I'll continue with that. Switched power is going to flow down here into our ADR, accessory delay relay. V power here, we're going to go ahead and assume that is a switched power. We don't know for sure, but I'm going to draw it as switched. We have a switched power here. And some sort of V reference, voltage reference here. We'll draw this in as a switched power. I'm not exactly sure. This may be some sort of ground side control command for the main light switch, but we'll draw it in as switched power right now, because likely we are going to see a voltage on here, but a voltage that can't handle any current, basically, because we do have a resistor right here. That's what that little squiggly line is. So really what this is doing is when this main light switch is grounded, it's just sending a signal basically to that microprocessor, which will then understand that you're trying to turn on the main light switch. Okay, draw in our switched grounds. That's going to be in yellow. Oh, I missed a ground at all times here, guys. My bad. All right, drawing in that yellow. So switched ground here on the other side of our BSR, on the other side of the ADR, and the other side of our interior lamps. And we don't know what this is here. Being that it's a simple switch function coming from a 10 amp fuse, I'm going to go ahead and draw this in as blue as a switched power. Because if this were grounding right here, if this interior lamp circuit were to go to ground, as soon as this interior lamp relay turned on right here, we would end up likely blowing this fuse if we were short this wire to ground, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and assume that's some sort of switch power leading to the interior lamp circuit, which we could verify if we went back to that diagram. But here's what we're looking at. BSR, ADR, battery saver relay, accessory delay relay, are involved in all of our diagrams and could be our problem itself. Accessory delay relay is controlled and given power from or to it from the battery saver relay. So if the BSR drops out, we're going to lose the ADR, the accessory delay. If we lose power at fuse 41, we're going to not have battery saver or accessory delay relay. It's impossible to know if we lose power at fuse 2, if this VBAT, if that's required for this microprocessor to turn on the BSR and the ADR, or just turn on the BSR and actually command the ground side for the ADR. We don't know, but we can kind of guesstimate. I guess I'd prove out that this wire works as well. So what we're looking at here, guys, is a couple points for failure. We could have, not all of them use the accessory delay relay. So we could have a faulty BSR, something going on with this fuse, this wiring in between, the instrument cluster itself, maybe something with fuse 2, wiring in between. BSR is internal of the cluster. So you guys can see here that this is a black box drawn inside of here, right? Likely this is a non-replaceable relay inside of the cluster. Same thing with the interior lamp relay. So get all this scribble off of here, guys. And what we're looking at now is a singular testing point, right? I'm not pulling the dash apart to get to the radio. I'm not pulling the door panel apart to get the door window switch and wiring. I'm not pulling the headliner apart to get to the dome light. I'm not pulling any of that crap apart, guys, because we've been able to narrow down a similarity between all of the diagrams so far. That is the instrument cluster. That is the battery saver relay, accessory delay relay. Without the BSR functional, the accessory delay relay will not function. That BSR is internal or likely internal to the instrument cluster itself. And we have a microprocessor inside of that cluster right here that is commanding the show. So when we're dealing with module issues, or what seems a microprocessor is a module, there's no other way around it. When we're dealing with module issues, we need to verify a few things before we can condemn the actual module, right? You can't just throw a cluster at this thing. You can't spend hundreds of dollars of the customers money without verifying that everything else was okay. Because we said at one point that fuse 41 or fuse 2 could potentially be our problem. Also, this cluster has to get ground from somewhere, and we don't see any ground path on here. So I would go ahead and look through all my diagrams again and figure out where this cluster is connected to ground. It's going through switches everywhere. And I know I'm going really fast here, guys. I don't want this to be an hour-long video. You can go ahead and slow down certain parts here. Here we go. Ground right here, connected to some sort of ground inside of the cluster. So G300. G300 right there, which is not the grounds that we were dealing with in our other diagrams, okay? ADR, ADR, BSR, BSR. ADR here can't function without the BSR. Guys, I'm running towards the cluster on this one, guys. It's now time for me to pull the dash apart, get the cluster to the point where I can test at the connector, where I can test at the, what is this, let me grab the highlighter. C220 is the connector I'm looking for, C220A and B. So now you get to determine how you want to test. You can use a voltmeter. We want to make sure that in the event of the failure, so when the cluster drops out and the radio shuts off and blah, 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 we have power, we have ground. If we lose power or ground during the failure, then we know that we're tracing a potential wire issue back up this line on light green and orange, up black and light green, on that ground that was going to G300 here. If we're losing power and ground, we're tracing back through the circuit. If we have power and ground there, is that enough to condemn the module? Using a voltmeter to test for power and ground can be tricky, especially if we don't know if there's current flowing through that circuit at that moment, okay? We've all seen the test where you can take and in a circuit that's not flowing current, you can have one strand of wire that's okay. This is probably where I would be getting my test light out and or a headlight bulb or whatever I want to use, something that's lesser than 10 amps, 10 amps, 10 amps. So really 10 amps is kind of our go-to here. Something that's less than 10 amps, probably even less than 5 would be safe. I would maybe throw a 1 amp, a 2 amp load on there, you know, a 1/4 amp test light, whatever. Basically, we're proving out that the circuit's able to flow current. So I would take one end of my test light, use a T-pin or acupuncture probe or whatever, use that special pinout kit that I have from AES Wave, and I would pin out that connector, and I would take one end of my test light into, let's say, pin 19 at C220B, which is that black and light green wire. I would take the other lead of my test light and attach it into pin 12 at C220, which is a pink and orange wire. My test light lights up. That means I have good ground. That means I have good power. I'm able to flow current through that circuit. I've verified that I can get power and ground to my cluster. Now is the time, basically, when you can go ahead and condemn the cluster. That is our point that's tying this all together. That is been verified that we do have power and ground to it. It makes perfect sense. There's a lot of different things you can do here, guys, but basically we're at the point of a decision. Do we pull this cluster and try to repair it? Do we send the cluster out for repair, or do we simply get a new cluster? Now, typically, guys, in all my past videos, I've never been one to repair a module because there's a lot of risk involved. If you wreck the module, if you do something wrong, you have a paperweight in front of you. They may not even accept it as a core on a new module or on a reman module, okay? So if you don't feel comfortable repairing the module, don't do it. It could be a risky gamble. On this one, I did go ahead and resolder pins within the module itself, because the reason that I got to that point was when I was pulling the cluster out, I kept the key on and I wiggled on that connector back and forth, and I was actually able to get it to turn on and turn off. Okay? Not really consistently, but if I just manipulated it the right way, doing the wiggle test, right, I was able to get it to drop out. And it turns out that the lead frame, or basically the wiring that runs from the piece of the connector that actually goes and attaches to the circuit board itself, it kind of meshes through the board, right? They solder the pins to the board. Well, it turns out there's an issue with those solder joints. So what I did is I very carefully flowed a little bit of solder, heated them up, flowed a little solder into each one, reconnected everything, and everything was good to go. Turn the key back on, wiggle the connector, move the cluster around as much as I wanted to, and I couldn't get it to drop back out. Okay? So I was able to repair this one. Now, unfortunately, and this is a bit of a lesson, I returned the vehicle back to the customer. I drove it and I let it run, I manipulated it, and I probably had an additional half hour to an hour between driving it, getting the dash put back together. I just kept messing with it, trying to get it drop out. Never dropped out once for me. Gave it back to the customer. He drove an hour home, and 3/4 of the way through his drive, it dropped out for a split second, and then it was okay. It came back. He called me the next day saying it was dropping out again. Not nearly as often. For this vehicle, guys, I've actually told the customer that he should go ahead and send the cluster out for repair. I could get it back in and I could try to reflow some solder in there, but I'm concerned, I have concerns about, one, not fixing it again, and two, damaging it or doing something to the board itself, overheating it maybe, whatever you would want to call it, but wrecking the cluster itself to where he doesn't qualify for a core charge for it, because it would end up costing him or me more money in the long run, okay? So I suggested he either sends the cluster out for repair or he go ahead and just order up a new one. Now there's a company out there called Circuit Board Medics. I actually met up with the people at a training event. They seem like great people. I've never personally worked with them before, dealt with them, but I've heard great things. I sent him to them. I sent the customer to them. They offer the ability to refurbish his cluster for a certain amount of money. He ships it to them. They fix it. They ship it back. Or he can buy a brand new one, give him his VIN number. They'll pre-program it. They'll send him a cluster, and then within a certain amount of time, he has to send him his old one back as a core. So it seemed like a pretty good deal. And that way he's got a low risk repair. Unfortunately, guys, yeah, I didn't end up fixing this truck. He is actually going to swap the cluster out himself. But through my diagnosis, I was able to accurately diagnose the vehicle in the fact that it is a cluster that has failed. And I was able to put a Band-Aid on it, I guess. I don't know, not really repair it, but I was able to get it better so that he had a speedometer all the way home. He had a speedometer for his next few days going to work. That kind of stuff was functional more than when I had seen it last time. And again, guys, here's video from before moving the cluster around and dropping out, and video after moving things around and it not dropping out. So I verified my repair. It just, I don't know, guys, I guess I got kind of unlucky on this one. Okay, that's it, guys. If you enjoyed this video, if you learned something, how to apply a diagram to your diagnosis, that kind of thing, if you just thought the video was interesting, useful, whatever it was, please, guys, give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It looks really good for us and our channel in general. Click that little bell icon so that way you get notified when we come out with our next video. Again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, let's call it a case study on this 06 F250. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And as always, happy wrenching, everyone. Thank you.